everyone, welcome back to the Boston Ramesh channel. After a bit of a break, I'm excited to pick up where we left off with our ServiceNow App Dev Fundamentals series. Today, on day 23, we are diving into a very important tool in ServiceNow, Flow Designer. But before we jump into the content, I have a very quick update from my side. Most recently, like a couple of months back, I earned my ServiceNow Application Developer certification. That was the intention of me starting this series, to learn and get my certification. So I'm looking forward to bringing even more value to this series with some fresh insights. And then again, one more quick change to the way that I'm going to handle these videos. Instead of using the loaner application project, which I was using until day 22, I'm going to use the usual personal developer instance with some basic concepts by showing that what can be done, but instead of not going through the deep dive into the projects sort of thing, because it is taking too much of time. But I think at some point in time I can definitely touch upon those very critical complex areas using different examples instead of a project that I probably cannot do it going forward. So Flow Designer is such an essential tool in ServiceNow, and mastering it will really set you apart as a developer, because as a developer we need to know and master the Flow Designer to make the processes more streamlined. So I'm committed to making this series as useful and insightful as possible for the developers out there. In today's video, I will guide you through the basics of Flow Designer and show you how to set up workflows to automate processes in ServiceNow. Whether it is managing incidents, approvals, or routine tasks, Flow Designer will allow us to create powerful automation without needing to write a single line of code. All right, so let's get into it and see how Flow Designer can make our development process faster and smarter. So what exactly is Flow Designer? Flow Designer is ServiceNow's no-code tool for automating routine tasks and processes. So it is designed for people like us, like developers, who want to streamline workflows without getting deep into coding, right? That means it lets us create automation based on conditions and specific triggers. So it's flexible enough for various ServiceNow applications. So the Flow Designer is especially useful for developers because it brings both simplicity and power together. Instead of writing complex scripts, you can visually configure automated processes that handle many routine tasks. Not just for the developers. If you imagine, even a business user can, if they have some knowledge of how to use this tool, can configure a flow using the Flow Designer to meet their business requirements. It's not easy, but with a little bit of training, anybody can do that sort of configuration. So building a workflow is not just for developers, but it can be done by business users with a no-code setting. This means you can focus on high-impact work, knowing that Flow Designer is handling repetitive processes reliably in the background. Now it is time to show and tell. So I will use the mirror diagram to explain what are the different components of the Flow Designer, what are the different areas that we need to understand when we deal with the Flow Designer. And after that, I will open the personal developer instance and create a very simple workflow end to end, so we can see the power of the Flow Designer and how it works in the ServiceNow. So let's look at what is the definition, right? So the flow is an automated sequence of actions. And let's see what are the different components. And let's do a little bit of deep dive here quickly in this mirror diagram. It will really help us to look at the big picture, and then we can dive into the personal developer instance and see the real Flow Designer. The Flow Designer is used to automate the processes. Any process, you take any process in any company, if they are using the ServiceNow, they can definitely utilize the power of the Flow Designer to automate most of the processes that were usually done in a manual way, right? So we need to understand what are the different types of processes in a company. to understand what is the advantage of doing something automation. If they are going to reduce the time, if they are going to reduce the effort, and if you are going to reduce the money spent on doing some work, and everything is beneficial. Automation is beneficial most of the time. That's the reason why people do the automation. From a process perspective, this process usually starts with a user request or something, a request to do something, to deliver something, to achieve something. And then the automation gives most of the time error-free request processing, right? If there are more manual processes, then there will be a chance for more errors. So if you have the automation, then you have error-free request processing. And then you need to know, if you have to enable automation, you need to know the sequence of actions so that each action has its own starting point and ending point, and then hand it over to the next action uh, with another input to the next action. So these are all steps that needs to be automated. All right. Now let's look at what is exactly involved in creating a flow. To start a flow, the flow should start with a trigger, right? Trigger is basically a time when something has to start. And then if it has to start, then it will proceed with a particular condition. And then it will have an action, a specific action to achieve whatever the reason this flow is actually built on. So Flow Designer is definitely an intuitive user interface. When we open it, we will see. We'll see the flow trigger, flow actions, and then data panel. These are the main components that you see on the user interface when you open the Flow Designer. So triggers, basically, as I said, a trigger is a starting point for any flow. But there are different types of triggers. So there can be an application-based trigger, or a record-based trigger, or a schedule-based trigger. So let's see what are the different types of applications. There can be a metric-based application. There can be a service catalog. That means if somebody ordered something in the service catalog, that means it has to start a trigger. So that's called application trigger. And then record-based, this can be a create, update, or delete action. It's an update. It updates a record. Say, for example, incident is created. What should happen? So that's a record-based trigger. And the schedule. Schedules can be anything, like it can be a daily, weekly, or monthly, or repeat every time. If you want to generate a report and send it to the executives, you can create a workflow to have the steps involved to provide the inputs to run a specific report about number of users uh, requested a certain product to the manager who is managing the particular region, and it can happen every day. So this workflow can actually trigger, start the report. Given the situation, it will generate the report and send it over the link or whatever that the flow is designed uh, to the manager, who can actually look at the report and take actions accordingly. And flow actions, these are the actions that happens in the flow. That's exactly where the actual work happens. It will give an outcome, right? Outcome of a workflow can be a data created, as I said. A report can be created and sent it out, or it can be updated. A data can be created. A new row can be created. It all depends upon the output that we want, or data collected and updated. And there is one panel called data panel in the Flow Designer on the right side. If you see it, it's basically the data flow of the whole Flow Designer panel. It's available to reuse, and that visibility helps the designing process of the flow. Now let's look at test. How do we test it in the flow? So when we open the Flow Designer, we can test within the Flow Designer. You don't have to go out of the Flow Designer. You can quickly test the flow that we design without updating any record permanently. There can be a record updating needed, but it won't be updated permanently. So it will execute and all the records that needs to be, and it will send out all the log messages. It will show the report how the flow is actually working, and then we will see the execution details to know uh, the output that is desired for a particular workflow is there or not. Now let's go into the real flow designer and see how that is working for us. All right, so let's look at the flow designer user interface. To access the flow designer interface, you will have to go to the process automation. Then you will see here the flow designer. You will also see a workflow studio here. I'm not really going to cover the workflow studio. That is something new, introduced or rather brought back into Xanadu release. So this is the Xanadu release instance I have. I'm just looking at confirming that this is a Xanadu release. Yeah, I have the Xanadu release. Going back to the flow designer. So when I open the flow designer, it's going to open in a new window. So here, even though we clicked on the flow designer, it ended up opening the workflow studio, but that's not going to change anything in terms of what we use the flow designer. So this is where you have under the flows, playbooks, flows, subflows, actions, and decision tables. Flows, subflows, and actions, so these are related to the flow designer. Subflows are individual flows that can be used as part of the flows because it has its own what we call a unique nature in terms of providing the service to the flows. But subflows has to be part of a flow. It cannot really run on its own. And actions, again, we can have individual actions that can be reused many times, because if there is an action that can be repurposed multiple times, that's what we have here. For the flows perspective, let's go ahead and look at what it looks like, the user interface. Once to see the user interface, let's first give a name to our workflow, the workflow test, and then just click on that build flow. Here we will see what exactly the user interface is for the flow designer. As we discussed it before, this is the title, and we have the trigger. Trigger is basically will have what type of the trigger it is. It is a record based, or the schedule based, or the application based, right? So that's what we discussed. Like if it is a record based, then you will see different types of activities like create, update, created or updated. And scheduled is basically daily, weekly, monthly, repeat. And then application is basically SLA task, inbound email, service catalog. So these are the items that are specific to the application. For example, if somebody is sending an email to ServiceNow, then ServiceNow will decide what needs to be done to that email and create an action item or create a notification to the support team, so something like that. So that is an application-based trigger. So for now, let's keep it as updated, and so that we can see the next steps here. So when you are looking at the record updated, then obviously we need to look at the table. So we can select what table it is, and then we can put a condition on top of it. We'll go through a use case scenario, but for now, just look at what all is available. And from an actions perspective, as we know, action has like three areas. Like action can be an action that you can actually configure what type of action it is, and then you can have a flow logic. For example, flow logic is nothing but if-else conditions that you can actually process through a number of data points. And then subflow is basically there are like pre-built subflows that we can use. Um, this is not something that we are going to do. This is a little bit more complex, deep dive type of scenario that we can do in the future. But for now, that's what we have here, actions. And then an error handler, if there is a specific situation, if something goes wrong, what needs to be done? Say, for example, this workflow is trying to connect to an external external database. Say, for example, another company's database. And then when it runs and it tries to fetch a bunch of records, And then while it is doing it, it suddenly fails, maybe a network error or something happened. Then if we don't handle that error, then we don't get the data as expected, or the data will be corrupted, or nobody knows what happened. So if something like that happens, we can use the error handler to kick off some additional activities so that the support team knows that this integration failed for so and so reason at this particular data point from an external integration. So take this action. So there's an action or the task will be created for the support team. That is one example we can think of. But for now, let's put it back to this. And this is what we were talking about, the data pill. So this is a data panel. Data panel is basically where this is called pill. A pill is basically holding the data in real time so that we can use it, we can refer it, because every single step will have its own data points here that are these pills are holding that dynamic values, and then we can use it, and then we can process the actions. And then some of these are grayed out. Only when we start building it, it will open up. But we have test. That's what we were talking about. We can test this workflow here itself. And then once we know if when it is working, the workflow is working as expected, then we can activate the workflow so that actually logged in users can actually see that is being implemented. And obviously there are different areas. We will see that later, but that's what we need to know about what is the user interface looks like when you open the Flow Designer. All right, let's go ahead and look at this use case so that we can build a sample workflow. So the objective here is, this is on the incident table. So the objective here is automatically update the short description of high priority incidents assigned to a specific group with a dynamic value. Okay, so this is a little bit, it's not complex, but it's a little bit additional steps that we wanted to cover here, right? So I wanted to add a little bit more dynamism to the values here. So how this is going to be, like, what is the flow setup, right? Trigger. So we're going to run this workflow on a table incident when the condition meets either it is created or updated, right? If any incident is created or updated, this workflow will start. And what conditions that we wanted to put on this trigger. This trigger will continue to execute the flow only when the incident, either it is created or updated, of a high priority, and the condition is when assignment group is set to network. There may be different assigned groups, or there may not be any assigned groups, but whenever the assignment group is set to network and the incident priority is high, then the workflow will start to the next step, doing some actions. So what is the action here? So the action here is we're going to update the record, the same incident record. And then what is the update? We are going to put the field short description. So what exactly we are going to update the short description? We are going to update the short description with some dynamic value. What is the dynamic value? The assignment group, whatever the assignment group that we put. Here we are saying network, so we are going to put the network. So end of the day, when this workflow runs, what should be the result? The result should be, when triggered, the flow appends the group name to the short description with a message saying that incident for network, because network is the assignment group, urgent attention needed. So that's what we're going to do. Very simple. We'll see. I will go ahead and start building that, and you can watch me doing it and see how easy it is to have this workflow in place. Okay, so let's continue to build the use case here. As part of the use case, we said we'll be using this workflow to trigger whenever there is an update on the incident table. And the condition is if the priority is high and assignment group is set to network. So that's what we have. We don't have anything specifically we need to update, but I'm going to do uh, for every update, we're going to check it. So just my particular preference for this scenario, nothing more than that. So what is going to be the action? So I'm going to update. That update means it's an update record. And then the record is going to be, this is where you're looking at. The record is coming from this session here itself. So I'm going to use the same incident record because this is what it is coming from the data pill. That is the data panel. So what we are trying to say is whichever the incident record started the workflow will be used here to update the record. We are not updating any other record. So that means the moment we selected this incident record from the data pool, the table is automatically selected. So as we said, we're going to update the short description. So the short description is going to be uh, so it's going to be static plus dynamic. So we said incident for, we wanted to bring the assignment group, whatever the assignment group that was selected. So let's see how we can use the data pill picker. This is the data pill picker. Um, that's where we are trying to get the dynamic value. So whenever the trigger data updated, we are going to incident record the incident record that is selected. And then we are going to look for assignment group. And then in the assignment group, if you just select the assignment group, it will give you a sys of the assignment group, but we wanted the name. So let's go for the name. And then here, after that, and then we're going to add a few more strings here, urgent attention needed. So what are we trying to do here? Incident for whatever the assignment group here is created. So urgent attention needed. That is just short description we should expect to see. So that's all. Let's go ahead and click on the done. So this actually saved the workflow. Now to test it, let's go ahead and test it. So in the testing process, you can select an existing. You can select the existing incidents and try to update whatever the changes that you wanted to test and how the workflow will react. Or you could just create a new incident record because the workflow that we are creating it will work for any new incident or an existing incident because it is created or updated. So why don't we just go ahead and create a new one and see what happens, and then also we can try the existing one. Okay, let's go ahead and see the caller is Beth Anglin here, and there is no assignment group by default, so I'm going to just select the network. There are a bunch of other assignment groups, but the network is the one. And for the short description, because this is a new assignment group, I mean new item, so I'm going to just use test and see what happens. Just submitted this. Now that incident is in the memory for this particular workflow testing session. This is not really going to create a new incident in the repository. So once this test is done, that incident is not anymore available. Okay, so let's go ahead and run the test. And if it is taking, if the workflow is a bit complex and it takes a long time to process a lot of external data or flow, or it has some time-bound scheduled based items, we could just put the run test in the background so that we can go ahead and do some other work. So I ran the test. Now the test has finished running. View the flow execution results. So let's go ahead and click on that. Now you see the state of this execution. The trigger, the actions, there may be a bunch of actions, but in this case, we have only one action. The state is completed, and this is showing in the green. That means there is no error. And if you click on it, if you open that, you will see the real-time values. That is a runtime value. This is a configuration. If you see this, the dynamic, I wanted to explain here the dynamic nature of what we are trying to pull the assignment group here, right? So in this record, we have selected network, which is the default condition to actually process it. So incident for the network, that is the dynamic result, dynamic value of the record is actually, you know, pulled and updated. But if you really want to see if in the record how it looks like, incident for network, urgent attention needed. I will open the record and see. So now you see we have created this incident, and I set the network as assignment group. And after that, if you see, the network incident for network urgent attention needed is updated short description. So this is all happened because of the workflow triggered on the create um, trigger. You could do the same thing for the update, but again, you know that is also possible. So let's go back to the flow. We can cancel it. Now, if you want to activate it, you can go ahead and activate it. That means once you activate it, this is available. And once it is available, then it will apply to all the items in the repository for any incident that is either being created or updated with high priority. And then assignment group set to network, this will happen. These updates will happen until you deactivate it. But if you are planning to update this flow in the future for something else, you have to check out, update it, and republish it. So these are the things that will be part of the flow designer. All right, so we have come to the end of this topic, flow designer. Before we close this video, I would like to quickly go through these best practices. Tip number 1, use conditions to keep flows efficient by running them only when needed. So conditions are needed for the trigger to start the workflow. So if you can control that at the trigger itself, then there is no need to run any other checks in the actions. Then tip number 2, try data pills to make your flows dynamic by pulling in real-time values. So as you have seen in my use case, we can pull a lot of dynamic values of the record or any other related records easily. So we don't have to do any hard coding of any values. And tip number 3, enable execution logs to track and troubleshoot each flow step easily. As we are all do as a developer, logs are our friends. Every time, even though it is successful or any unsuccessful execution of the code or this flow, we'll come to know if there is any way that we can improve the process. So that will conclude this session. And I hope you liked this video. If you can, please join me in my next video at the day number 24. Until then, thank you very much. Have a great day.